Welcome to the Hard Signal Podcast, a production of Next Gen Insight. And I'm Clayton Tidwell, its founder. Today's guest operates at the intersection of premium winemaking, long cycle agricultural planning, and highly relationship driven growth. Shawn Pearce is the co founder and operator behind Familia Vicente Pearce Wines, aka FVP, a limited production single-vineyard winery based in the Argentinian state of Mendoza, with distribution growing across the U.S. and now into Canada. What makes FVP interesting isn't just the wine itself, it's the operational reality underneath it, managing constrained supply, multi-year production cycles, distributor forecasting, inventory timing, and growth decisions in a business where you can't simply scale overnight. So today we're going to get into how the business actually works under pressure. Shawn, welcome to Hard Signal.
Hey, Clayton, thanks a lot for having me. That was a really good introduction. Thank you.
So you started FVP Wines in 2013 and you had a limited production of around 50 cases. What made you decide to turn what sounds like a passion hobby into an actual business?
Yeah, I mean, I got to say, it was slowly but surely the growth from 50 cases to around 1,500 now over the course of many years is a pretty slow path, but it was kind of a long-term plan that has happened relatively on schedule. The wine was delicious, I think, is the main reason that, we drank those first 50 cases ourselves. We never labeled that wine back in 2013, but in 2014, we made our first commercial wine, designed a great label with a great designer down in Mendoza, and kind of, turned it into a real business.
That you could actually sell these wines.
Those first 50 cases that we made, took them around to all kinds of people in the industry, tangentially in the industry, got feedback, heard their comments. And overall, the feedback was, you guys have a great location. That vineyard produces great grapes. We focused in on what the winemaking style would be in order to match the location. And really, the next year started making and selling the wines.
Did you have a mentor or somebody that helped guide you in this process?
Oh, that's a good question. I got to look back and say there were a couple kind of key figures that sort of pushed us over the edge into, from farming to winemaking earlier than we expected. One of those people was actually a winemaker at Fabre Montmayu. It's a winery in Mendoza and Luján de Cuyo. It's actually where my wife and I got married. I'm sure there's a picture on our FVP Instagram of, and if there isn't, I need to add one, but of that party in 2006. But Fabre Montmayu is a French-owned winery in Mendoza. There's a winemaker there who they had been buying our grapes and using them for one of their wines. And he sort of pulled my brother-in-law, Juan Pablo, aside and said, we blind taste all of our producers. I mean, Fabre Montmayu, it's a serious operation. So they buy grapes, make wine separately. Each wine from a specific vineyard has its own tank. They do blind tastings. And he said, you guys won first place of the producers for Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon. You guys should make wine. And that's when we kind of picked in two barrels. That was the 2013 move that we sort of had planned on waiting for. So that would definitely be one person that kind of pushed us forward. And then, we lived in Chile. When my daughter was born, my wife and I, we moved to Santiago, Chile. We were living in New York at the time. It was to open a business for the bank that I was working for. And we were going back and forth to Mendoza a lot. I met a lot of Chileans. I met someone that worked for Cono Sur that was a friend of a guy that I worked with at the bank. And he had covered a lot of territory, including the U.S. for that brand. And we sat down and tried some of these original wines and sort of talked about what's possible. His name is Max. He was super helpful in terms of guiding. There's a couple guys from Buffalo too that fit in there that were in the wine business outside of Buffalo. J Mac for one. And so yeah, we talked to a lot of people really before kind of deciding to go for it, at least vetting and getting some feedback, but no individual person that has been standing alongside every day. And now that you mention it, I wish we had one.
Okay. So, a lot of people have passion for wine, but I guess with that little bit of push and encouragement that gave you the chutzpah to actually do this, right?
Yeah, I think buying the vineyard was really the first crazy step, and sort of no one egged us on to do that. That was us on our own, kind of dreaming and doing the dream, and then turning it into something afterward. It was a whole nother process.
So you chose to focus on Bordeaux blends specifically. That's a kind of a crowded segment. Why is that your anchor?
Well, that was really the initial wine that we made. It is probably 20%, maybe a little less of what we make now in terms of the wine portfolio or the wine lineup that comes
Okay.
from our property. But the reason is that we purchased a vineyard in 2011 in Lunlunta in Maipu, Mendoza. So that's all the districts from another winery. That winery had planted our vineyard in 1988, 1990, and the planting was primarily the Bordeaux grapes, Cabernet
Okay.
Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, and then we added Malbec and Petit Verdot. So we have kind of the 5 big grapes for a Bordeaux blend. So kind of the obvious first choice was to make a Bordeaux-inspired blend out of Argentina. I love Bordeaux. I guess I don't know anyone who doesn't. But yeah, it was kind of the obvious place to start. 2 years later, we started making some varietal wines. We added 100% Malbec. We added 100% Cabernet Franc, 100% Merlot, and then we moved into making some other wines. The Gamay that we make from a single row of grapes that we have at the farm. We make a rosé from. We added another rosé. We make 100% Petit Verdot now. We make 100% Cab. So we kind of, in a way, limited to the estate fruit and have chosen to sort of create wines out of what's there after starting with just one wine in the first 2 years.
Those Bordeaux varietals, if you grew them in California and blended them, you could market them as a Meritage. Do
Mhm.
you specifically kind of position yourself or your wines or your Bordeaux blends as a Argentine Meritage?
I mean, the sort of branding we use is corte. That is the name. If
Okay.
you think about the verb to cut, it's really the winemaker's cut of the vineyard. Cortar is usually cutting grass, cutting fabric, right? So we are cutting pieces of the vineyard out to create something that's unique and really an expression of the place. It really, the wines, when you taste through them all, sort of have the same stylistic thing that really comes from being grown in the same location. But yeah, so we call it Corte, Familia Vicente Pearce, Corte from the Ascuénaga vineyard. It's a single vineyard red blend. Anecdotally, if you put Corte on a wine list in the United States, most people probably don't know what that means or why it would be used. So we've seen restaurants change from Familia Vicente Pearce, Ascuénaga Vineyard Corte, whatever, $18 a glass, to Bordeaux blend from Argentina, Familia Vicente Pearce Corte, and it sells more. So
Uh-huh. It's definitely a new term for me. I was not familiar with it. So if you were constrained by anything, if you weren't constrained by anything, capital, regulations, your own preferences, what would you change about your product strategy?
that is a very good question. So I think the biggest constraint really is risk. So what is the probability of success, right? Risk is the constraint. So I feel like you can get access to capital. It's more about how much capital are you willing to risk or are people willing to risk? So if there was unlimited capital and high probability of success, one thing I would start with is we have this 100-year-old adobe house at the entrance to the farm. I want to turn it into a tasting room,
Mm.
kind of a lunchtime restaurant. It's right on sort of a main drag going through the border of Luján and Maipú. There's some famous vineyards there in addition to ours. There's a great golf course. It's on the wine route where people ride their bikes by. There are buses that go by. It is really the
Nice.
perfect place to adapt that adobe building into like a beautiful rustic, mud interior walls, tiles on the floor, tasting room, lunch spot that I think would be really busy. We need a little bit of time and a little bit of capital to get it done. But I think that would be one of the natural steps because in the end, our product, thinking about like brand, your question is really kind of around brand as well. We are building this brand that has real people behind it and a real place behind it. And that is not the case with tons of consumer products, right?
Mm.
We can name dozens, I'm sure, including many wines. So to have an additional physical space that is aligned with our philosophy in terms of, I think we might have talked about before the inspiration for our first label. We boiled it down to 2 words, rustic and elegant. And I can certainly explain
Mm.
more, but those are like the inspirational words that are representative of the vineyard, of the area, of the people, and kind of a design aesthetic. I have a bottle right here, actually. So this should say rustic and elegant to you, right? Because it's a woodcut print, but it's beautiful. It's well
Okay.
done. It's a
Yeah.
real artist's piece of work. So anyway,
It does look like a piece of art. Yeah.
having that physical space, I think, complements the brand in kind of would be be sort of a great next step. So yeah, with unlimited capital and high probability of success, I think that's the next move. We do have some wines in the pipeline that kind of would also be an answer to your question. We have a reserve wine coming out. We're going to make a champagne method sparkling rosé next year.
Ooh.
So there are these things that are happening that are all in line with the brand, require time, effort, energy, capital, but I think are in line with what we're trying to do.
So you mentioned we went from 30 and 50, excuse me. You went from 50 cases, now you're 1500 plus. That's 30x. At what point, I'm sure, did some things break or broke as you scaled? Can you talk about some of those and how some of those breaks and how you address them?
Yeah. I mean, 30x makes me feel pretty good, but
Yeah.
in the end, this is still like garage winery size, just, for that perspective. But I love the growth figure. So yeah, things that break, you know, in wine, and I'm sure this is the same for so many products, there are many steps that kind of need to be done well. I would love to do a trial that every step is done absolutely perfectly, every step is done well, and every step is done halfway. And then try those 3 wines. That would be like the dream come true, because you can really figure out how perfect things need to be. We are
Yeah.
striving to do things perfectly. Pick the grapes on the right date. Get them to the winery as fast as possible so they're still cold. Make sure they're not sitting around waiting to be crushed. It's just like step after step after step after step after step that has sort of a protocol that is the ideal way to do things. I think in every business, that doesn't actually happen. Like
No.
things are done perfectly very rarely.
Yeah.
I'd say we maintain a very high standard for doing things well, and I have through my whole career, but it would be nice to sort of see what happens when we do things perfectly. So in other words, it's not like things have broken, but the minor bruises, bumps, partial fractures, or whatever you want to call them, are just like, we're about to export wine to Canada right now. We don't have enough of the red foil capsule,
Okay.
which is
Yeah.
like a big part of our branding. We don't have enough of them. So we can't ship the whole thing until they arrive. They're going to take another 3 weeks to get to be made. So like that's a bend without a break, but that's not great, right? We want to better anticipate what we need to ship to in a case like that to kind of be to avoid the break.
Okay, so nothing's
Um,
nothing's broken, but how about what was the scariest moment you've had where you thought you might, something might break or you might lose some significant value in your chain?
Yeah, I guess there have been bigger errors.
Yeah.
Maybe I have a little bit of a funny one. So I just thought of this. We make a rosé, and you can check it out on the website or Instagram, with Gamay. Gamay is the grape from Beaujolais in France. It is a single row at the vineyard. It makes like 35 to 85 cases. Usually, like we got it started in 2021. It would arrive, and we'd basically be able to sell it all pretty quickly because it's very small supply, great product. In 2023, that wine. Let me think actually even how this even happened. That wine was being set up for bottling, and if you can imagine, one row, it's a very small amount, so it's just a small tank. I think it was a 500-liter tank, ready to be bottled. And we were making the wine in a kind of a larger facility than where we make all of our other, like where we've always made all of our other wines. Every once in a while, we have to, due to capacity, we make a wine in a different place. So we made that wine, and it was pumped by someone in the winery into a 500-liter tank, into a 10,000-liter tank of a different wine.
Oh boy, yeah.
So that is gone and gone forever.
That was just for
That,
personal consumption at that point, right?
well, 500 liters, that was going to be bottled, imported, sold. I mean, that was, and then we're missing our wine for a whole year.
Yeah.
We're missing a wine that people have gotten used to buying. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of a disaster.
Yeah.
That's kind of a disaster. I would say that was like a hiccup that has now forced us, when the new wine for the next year came after a 1-year gap and it's not on people's shelves anymore and you have to go do a whole sales process again. It actually made me think about where that wine belongs, and that is like a higher end rosé. We have 2 rosés. One of them's more expensive. One of them's more normal price. And I just did some events in Greenwich, Connecticut, great suburban New York City commuting town, and just gorgeous little town where, there's definitely discretionary income, people spending money on food and wine and stuff like that. So I took a bottle to my distributor there and to an event and had people try it. And, everyone loves that wine. And now they'll probably be the biggest seller of Gamay Rosé from FVP of any of our distributors in their first year of having that wine, because it's like the right product market fit for that wine. So no pressure, Jamie and Will, if you guys see this podcast, but it's all going to you.
Get her done.
So yeah, those are the kind of things that happen to adjust from the mistakes, right?
Yeah. So hew a diamond out of the rough, right? So obviously you're still small. You kind of mentioned you're just barely bigger than a hobby. Is that simply that constraint there of your size? Is that due to your max hectares under the vine, or do you have any expansion plans?
Yeah, that is that's a good question, because it ties to philosophy. It is that we are producing estate wines. So we are producing wines that we grow the grapes and we own the property. So that is a thing in the wine world that is, to me, about, authenticity and having a real product and standing behind that product and showing people where it comes from.
Artisanship, right?
Yeah, knowing how the grapes are grown, knowing what, the organic farming practices. They're all described on the website, but you can actually come and see what's going on. That is important, I think, for the brand, and it's important to us. So it is, if you want to go make money in the wine business and you want to create something kind of big and successful, there are way easier ways to do it than the way we do it. There is tons of wine available in the world, extremely cheap, solid product, no story behind it. Anything you say about it is really just made up. But you can hire a marketing team, get a great label, find distributors, price it right, and create a business out of it. That from what I've seen out there, I'm sure it's a lot harder than it looks, but that is an easier route where you don't have a 2-year time horizon to produce a new product. You just fly somewhere, try a bunch of wines that are in tank, choose one and bottle it. So I feel like I'm losing track of your question.
That's fine. That's fine.
In my long answer, but we could expand by buying more land. We could expand with better production from the farm. We have very low yielding vines because they're old. We're actually doing a replant this year of a really small section with a long-term view of what we would like to be able to produce from the farm. So yeah, that's, I think, where the growth will come from. You need to kind of, in a way, pre-sell wine, which is extremely difficult because of the long production process. I would love
every
a new
vintage
distributor.
is slightly different.
Yeah, we're producing similar product through the years, but it is a single vineyard site, so that a vertical tasting things taste different. But for example, I'd love to find a distributor for 2027, maybe late 2026, that is in one of the states near us or near where we are now. So Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia. We like a new distributor in one of those places kind of for next year. So when that happens, someone's like, yeah, I'm really interested. And you get them samples. We love the wines. Can you come visit? Whatever. You need to have already kind of made the wine to be able to give it to them. Right. So there is a sort of risk you have to take to grow that you wouldn't have to take if you were more negociant style, purchasing wines that were already made. So yeah, that is, when it comes to growth, that is the constraint. But yes, we would like to use all the grapes at our farm in wine. That's the goal.
So
we have
you've got these old vines, and one of your methods of increasing yield is to replace those old vines with new vines on the same hectares under vine. How long is it for those vines? How long does it take for those vines to mature to produce quality grapes for your wine?
4 years.
4 years. Well,
Yep.
that's a long planning cycle right there. That's a whole Olympiad.
Yep. World Cup. We like to say World Cup in Argentina. But
Okay,
the
there you
Olympics are
go.
cool too.
So you've mentioned distributing across multiple states and expanding this distribution now a little further south down the Atlantic coast. And you're also moved into Canada, and you're looking into even getting into the UK. What does distribution actually look like for a small wine?
So current state is that we sell wine in New York, Connecticut, Vermont, a little bit in New Jersey, Tennessee, South Carolina, and we just started in Ontario. That's the current setup. But really, it just started with New York, friends that own a distributorship. We started knocking on doors with them, and starting in 2020, that's how it got started. And every other distributor we found has been through some personal connection. Buddy from high school's friend has a distributorship in Tennessee. A guy from my high school also that I didn't go to high school with owns a brewery, Sullivan's. He's the head of a brewery in Kilkenny, Ireland, who uses the same distributor in South Carolina. I had been chasing them. He got the introduction. We were down there for Easter break, met up with one of the owners. Someone married to Buffalo has a distributorship in Connecticut and Vermont. Like someone I used to work with owns a wine shop in New Jersey. That's how the distribution has happened for us. And in Ontario, we just thought, we're spending part of the year in Buffalo every year. We might as well just go across the border, help out a distributor to sell our wines and create, a footprint there. And, with a little bit of time and chasing and some trips, we ended up signing with the Vine Agency in Ontario, who's been doing a great job. They just got our wines. This is May? It was in February. We did some tastings with them last week in Toronto and Ottawa. So that is how we are set up now. And you mentioned like the UK and these states that are next to the states we're going to anyway, or that we're located in. So yeah, that would be an expansion. So the reason would be being able to grow. So, it's not necessarily easy to sell a lot more wine in the same geography that you're already in because of the size of the distributor, the number of reps, the accounts they have, you know. So adding a distributor is definitely an easier way to grow. In the UK, like my dad is actually moved to Buffalo, New York when he was in his late 20s from London, England. And so he's from there. And it is a place where I lived for 3.5 years. We recently got some good scores from Tim Atkin, the Master of Wine, who's a UK MW, who spends a month or two in Mendoza in Argentina every year and writes a big, awesome report about the wine industry and the wines there. So I just see that as a nice fit. I would love to always go back there. I lived there, worked there. I have friends that are there. So that would be a great next step in terms of international expansion. And yeah, it's about working on these things literally for a year or two. The brand building, we work on LinkedIn, we work on Instagram, we have a website with tons of information, we go to events ourselves. So yeah, that is the plan.
Right. So a lot of personal relationships have helped you expand through distribution, but has there been any particular logistics or regulatory hurdles that have been challenging?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, logistic hurdle, the first thing I think of is we had a truck with a container of wine that could not get over the Andes for 52 days.
Whoa.
So the bend not break or break didn't bend part, I mean, that actually is another thing that happened. And this is probably 4 years ago now, but we had a container leave Mendoza, go up to the pass. So containers from Mendoza often go over the Andes. The highest mountain in the Western Hemisphere is right above Mendoza there, Aconcagua, down into Valparaiso, the port an hour west of Santiago, Chile, and then up through the Panama Canal to New York. There was a giant snowstorm and the pass was shut for 52 out of 55 days. And we just brought the container back to wait. But yeah, that's a logistical challenge. And then so I manage the import. So my brother-in-law, Juan Pablo, he's in Argentina. We'll get all our export paperwork done, all the operational pieces. I coordinate logistics from the U.S. to bring wines to the U.S. Canada imports themselves to the Ontario through the LCBO. So that's easier for us logistically for sure. But yeah, right now I have a container landing this weekend. I have a truck going to pick it up in port. They're driving the entire container to a warehouse in Buffalo, emptying it, and then driving the container back to port. So yeah, we coordinate those things and, flat tires, that things happen. And then on the regulatory side, in the United States, there is regulation per state that we need to deal with. It is a little bit tedious, but yeah, once you have a national, federal import permit, you get your permit in your business-based state, and then you need to get permitting in every other state. And in some states, file monthly reports, and some are more expensive than others, some are more tedious than others. But yeah, that's the list, Clayton.
So speaking of logistics, in the last couple of months, we're well aware we've seen a huge explosion in, well, that may not be the right term to use, but in fuel prices. So that's directly impacting your freight rates. Are you just eating that in that going into your margin, or are you hedging?
We definitely are not big enough to hedge. I would be from a former career an expert in that activity, but we don't have an ISDA agreement signed with anyone to be able to enter into any derivatives contracts. So what we have seen happen and what we have done is, surprisingly, on the ocean freight side, the prices have barely moved. So the price to move a container from Santiago to New York didn't change much from last year to this year, which is nice. But the trucking in the United States and the trucking in the U.S. and Chile and Argentina didn't change much to get into Chile.
Interesting.
But in the United States, it's easily 50% higher,
Hmm.
primarily due to the fuel surcharge. But yeah, so that is something, we are absorbing that because there aren't, in the regulated atmosphere of alcohol in the United States, there really is not a way to temporarily, for an importer, apply a charge to their distributors when they sell them wine. You can't move it I mean, you would have to publish new prices every month, and then no one would want to buy your stuff anymore because that is not what you do. So, this is a big debate. I don't know, you're welcome to throw in your advice, but when you raise prices, do you raise prices some 3, 4, 5, 2, 1% a year, every year, and just make sure that that covers what you expect to happen? Or for us, we did it differently. We were a new business bringing wine to the United States the end of 2019, 2020. And we kept our pricing from then until April 1st, 2026. So we just raised our prices by a decent amount April 1st. And that was mostly because of we did not raise prices during COVID. We didn't raise prices at all, 6 years. But we've built a brand. We have a following. People recognize the label. And we did a step change. Boom, raised prices. Obviously, that's helps now cover, if we're paying any tariffs coming in now, if
Yeah.
the fuel surcharges and things like that. But it is what we did. And it was a little bit bumpy. I called all key accounts to tell them prices were changing. And, I think going forward, maybe it makes sense to, now that we're kind of established, to just do some small price raise every year. But I think in the beginning, it felt important for people to know what the price would be in the future for some period of time to be able to commit to selling our product.
So you've been in this for well over a decade now, and you're obviously paying attention to what's happening in the wine world. What may really excite you or concerns you about today's and the future of the wine?
I mean, I think the exciting part is like we are in a business that is an ancient beverage, right? I mean, this
Yep.
is a human civilization product, right? This is something that's been consumed for approximately 6, 7, or 8,000 years. And you know what? When you sit down in front of the fire, in front of the grill, there's a lot of fire because that's how we cook in Argentina.
Right. Yeah.
At a table, at these wine tastings we did last week in Ontario, there is something about an ancient product that somehow brings people together and allows some people to reach some common thing about whatever it is, wine, humanity, whatever the thing is, it still works. I think that is not new, but I think that is one of the exciting things about wine. There are other exciting things, like for me as a curious person, and I think why most people get addicted to wine, it's just a never ending lifelong learning project.
Yeah.
There are 1,000 native grapes in Italy. Like, go try to memorize
They're
them.
really
I
a
mean,
thousand. Wow.
yeah. So I think this is why people get addicted to wine. One of the reasons why they get addicted to wine, this ancient thing plus this forever learning thing. On the like concerning side, I guess, health warnings about alcohol. I feel like the advice changes every month, but yeah, I'd say that's something that, like, if you end up with, some huge tax or regulation related to alcohol, obviously that could hurt the business. Consumption generally, like, people can make decisions for themselves. Consumption generally is dropping around the world and has been for post COVID. I think it's just a post COVID hangover, really,
Yeah.
but relatively stable slash up 1%, down 1%, up 2%, down 2% in the more non-bulk wine category. So wines, $20 retail and up
Hmm.
are doing okay. So, but yeah, I think there's definitely some, concern around there. I feel like, cheaper wines have really suffered. I did a big study last week myself, just AI assisted on vineyard, vineyard surface area in like top 10 wine producing regions in the world, how that's changed over 10, 20 years, and how many vines have been ripped out or are planning on being ripped out, 2025, 2026, 2027. And there has been a massive adjustment in terms of the ability of the world to produce grapes that has been a relative buffer for the drop in consumption overall. But I think there's still some work to be done in terms of vineyard removals, and especially, lower end, really high quantity wine, which is sort of what dominates the market.
Are you seeing, maybe not necessarily in your higher tier of wine, but are you seeing consumers start to demand sustainability or organic growth or biodynamics or anything like that? Or is that kind of still a nice to have for on the consumer side?
I would say there are certainly people that demand that, and that's definitely still the minority. I would like to see more. I'd say it's overall a nice to have. There's a very small segment that is focused on sort of a really strict wine making style that is allows room for the product to suffer. You know, things that like really are letting the product go free. I want to say that's less than 1% of the whole market, but that would be the kind of extreme version of um, sometimes people refer to them as natural wines. That is too generic. I would rather talk about like literally the steps in the winemaking to produce that wine to result in what it is you're really looking for. But anyway, I'm for sure we can get into that in some other conversation. I'm happy to field any questions. But yeah, everyone else I feel like should ask for where were these grapes grown? Who grew these grapes? Do you know? Right? I mean, that is like that to me is the most basic question that probably 90% of people do not ask. So I would like to see some more of that, which leads to things like conversations about sustainable farming. You know, how are you farming? What products are you using? How are you making these wines? Yeah, I would like to see more. So what we've done on that side is on our back label, we have the laboratory test results of from our wines. So you see all the detail, you know, how much acidity, what are the SO2 levels at bottling. And then on our website, we talk about, you know, we pay our employees, they have pensions, they have, you know, healthcare, we provide them housing, we use drip irrigation, we're a solar powered farm, we use organic fertilizers, we use organic approved pest control, we use a lot of weed whacking instead of herbicides. You know, is it okay to be burning gas to run the weed whacker? Should we hoe instead? You know, we hoe sometimes, we weed whack most of the time. You know, these are like detail level things that like, yeah, I wish people would talk about them more. I would say sustainability is definitely important in general in the wine world. And, you know, it's up to the consumer to push a little bit more to understand where their products came from.
Yeah. So finally, you've been at this for over a decade. Where do you see FVP a decade from now?
Ooh, I think in 10 years, we definitely want to be using, well, in the next couple of years, all of our grapes. So our production should go from sort of 1,500 up to maybe 4,000 cases. I think you'll find us in a couple more states and maybe one other foreign country, maybe two. I think in 10 years, you will see what's going to be called Casa Escuénaga. So our vineyard is Vineyard Escuénaga Vineyard. We have a quincho, which is like a barbecue house we built last year. Quincho Escuénaga at the farm. It's a mile deep into the farm. Beautiful spot for, you know, authentic Argentine asado. But yeah, I think in 10 years, you'll see Casa Escuénaga will be along the roadside on, you know, in front of our place. And 10 years from now, like I think we can do that in 5 years, but in 10 years from now, I would also expect to see some of the production facility. We make the wines down the street from the vineyard. I would like to see in 10 years that we're actually making most of the wine right there on site. We should also have launched our olive oil in the next couple of years. So 10
Nice.
years forward, we have about 800 olive trees at the farm. We do make olive oil. We sell it usually to a producer in Argentina instead of we don't often bottle and market it ourselves, but that is definitely a project we want to get done the next couple of years. My kids will be in college or beyond in that time too, so you will find me in Argentina even more than you find me there now. Yeah, I think those are a bunch of changes to look forward to, but it's fun to think about it.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a really
Sure.
entertaining and very interesting conversation, and I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. This has been fun. I
All right.
appreciate it, Clayton.
Thanks.